In this video, we are going to talk about other multiples rather than P/E ratio. We are also going to talk about the limitation of valuation multiples in general. So far we have talked about the P/E ratio, and we said that the P/E ratio is the most common valuation multiple among practitioners. But P/E ratio relates exclusively to equity value. To see that, let's consider two firms in the same industry. So, firm A and firm B. So, let's say firm A has no debt and firm B has 1/3 of its capital structure as debt. Okay, so if we are going to use the P ratio for the firm A to value the firm B, or to come up with an estimate of the stock price for firm B, that's not very wise because we are ignoring the effect of debt. In order to resolve that issue, we can use the enterprise value multiples. So enterprise value multiples allows us to compare firms with different level of leverage. It's very similar to what we did with the transition from the dividend discount model to the discounted free cash flow model. The dividends are only available to equity holders, but in the discounted free cash flow model, we are using the free cash flows which are available to all firm investors, both debt and equity holders. So here, the enterprise value is the value of both equity of the firm and the net value of its debt. One of the most common enterprise values to use is enterprise value divided by EBITDA. So this fraction that you see here is representing a forward enterprise value multiple, because we are using the EBITDA, the expected EBITDA of a year from now. Okay. And for the denominator here, we have three choices: EBIT, EBITDA, and free cash flow. We prefer EBITDA to EBIT because it adds back non-cash expenses, which are the depreciation and amortization. And we also prefer EBITDA to free cash flow because sometimes the firm has a large investment in fixed asset, and the difference between EBITDA and free cash flow here is that the free cash flow does not the EBITDA does not consider capital expenditures. So if there is a change in the capital expenditures between comparable firms that we are trying to value them, it's better to use EBITDA. And that's the reason that this multiple is the most common multiple that is used in the industry or by the practitioners. There are many other valuation multiples available for investors. We are just going to mention the price to book ratio that we have learned in chapter 2. So if you remember, price to book value is equal to market value of equity divided by book value of equity. This valuation is most useful if we are valuing or comparing firms in an industry that the firm have substantial tangible assets. And there is also industry specific multiples. For example, in the oil and gas industry, you might see many specific multiples that relates to the capacity or reserves that a company has. Or another example is that, for example, if we want to value two firms in cable TV industry, we are going to value them by using uh, enterprise value divided by number of subscribers to that TV channel or that cable TV. Okay. So now let's talk about limitation of multiples. So first of all, we said that the law of one price says if two securities or two firms generate exactly identical cash flows in the future, their price today should be exactly the same. But we know that identical firms do not really exist. If they exist, the valuation multiples would have worked perfectly. But of course, in reality, there are differences between firms, and the usefulness of these valuation multiples depends on how big is these differences between firms. If we can come up with some adjustments for the valuations, we can use this valuation very well. But if the differences is making difficult for us to value two companies, it's better not to use them. Okay, or it's better to be aware of all the differences between two or three firms that we are comparing. Here in this table from your textbook, you can see the several valuation multiples for the footwear industry. So, for example, if we want to come up with an estimate of Nike stock price, we can use the uh, average P ratio, average industry P ratio, or uh, Adidas or Puma uh, PE ratios. But see that there is high differences between these PE ratios. Okay, so for example, one thing that you should consider is that Adidas and Puma are incorporated in Germany, and there are uh, different accounting conventions between Germany and United States. So we might not be able to directly compare earnings from corporation in Germany to corporation in the United States. We should be aware of the differences in conventions and try to adjust the earnings before calculating the P ratio. Okay. Uh, Another thing is that the we are not directly valuing the cash flows for a firm and calculating the present value of the those cash flows. We are valuing companies relative to other public companies. So the problem with that is, for example, an industry can be overvalued as a whole. So a good example is the internet industry during 2001. 2000, 2001. So during the crisis that happened in 2001, the bubble in prices of internet companies burst, and their value dropped significantly. So before that crisis, it was easy to value the companies based on other companies' P ratios or other valuation multiples. But all of those multiples in that specific industry was very higher than what it should be, because the price of firms were overvalued. So if the whole industry is overvalued, the estimate that we come up with another for another company would be not right.